Is it working? Do you hear me?
I think it is, but it's not very loud.
But how does?
It's on. It's just
Okay.
the gain's not.
Just have to speak louder.
I think the Gareth, but
Yeah. Okay. Do you know how can I turn this off? Is this always like that? Oh no. Okay. Okay.
yeah, you need to put the tip in.
Oh, not now. There's a piece of salad here.
Actually, Gareth, one last question. Are there any like volume controls? I think there are some media pieces that have they're like a little louder than
just
others.
here.
Use the
Oh,
mic
perfect,
keys.
great,
Yeah,
perfect.
like we're kind
Boom.
of up there right now, though.
Okay. I can start whenever you want.
I think you can just start, and then people will start sitting down. Otherwise, they're going to keep talking.
Okay, but this is everyone, right? We don't wait for anyone else.
I don't think we should wait.
Okay, so I start. All right. So hi. Do you hear me well? Can you hear me? Okay, so I think I was instructed by Helen to just start. Hi. So let me know if you don't hear me well. I can't really tell from here, so I guess you do if you're not saying anything. So my name is Aurora Mititelu, and today I'm gonna show you a little bit where I'm coming from, what my background is. I'm gonna show you a bit of my past work and a bit of my plans and why I'm here. Let me start with this picture of me when I was 10. I was participating, so I was in my hometown in Buzău, Romania, and I was participating in a computer graphics contest. And although I know it's cheesy to start your presentation with a picture of you as a kid, I think this picture is really very important for me because it really brings me down to earth to what I've been always doing as an artist, which is, drawing on the computer and being a little bit irritated about it as well. So after that, I went on to study decorative art in high school, and I did a bachelor in graphic design in Bucharest, in Romania, also an exchange semester in digital arts and animation. And then after that, I started to work as a junior animator, and then I moved to Berlin, where I worked as a 3D designer and art director and a 3D artist as well. And so my trajectory was always informed by this question that I was asking myself every time I was making a new choice, which was, where can I create visual art using a computer? And the reason why I'm telling you this is because I was sitting down kind of 2 years ago and thinking about, where I ended up. And I realized some of the features of my environment and my work are intentional, and some of them are more incidental. So you can see I'm building up to why I decided to come to DMA. But before I go to that, I want to show you a bit of my past and more recent work. So my work is mainly done in 3D rendering. I love 3D as a medium. I love how it simulates the way light and physics work in reality as well. I'm working a lot with natural light, natural elements, and simulations to create these environments and visuals. This is a selection of both independent projects and some more like commissions and things like that, so from the places I've been working in the past. So through the past years, I've been art directing and creating content for different kinds of projects, from media installations to live music, live visuals for music. I was also VJing a little bit. And recently I was doing some more like XR and digital advertising campaigns as well. This is one of the projects that I took part in. It's called the Hexadome. So the Hexadome is the structure. And they were hosting inside of it multiple audiovisual performances. And so for my part, I created this immersive landscape. So the visitors would experience it as a journey through the landscape, so they were sitting inside. And I played a lot with parallax and the feeling of being immersed in this kind of space. During 2010, I did the art direction for a label in Berlin. I created this series, which I called Sound Sculptures. So for each cover, I would take samples of the music, which you can see here on the left. And I would create like this 3D surface out of it, and then I was wrapping it around and creating these 3D sculptures, basically. So I could iterate and make a lot of covers for the many releases that they had. And I also like that it has this kind of jewel-like appearance that makes it somehow precious. And I'm going to talk about a little bit my most recent and still ongoing project called Mirror Neuron. I'll show you first the first prototype I exhibited in Berlin. Go on. Okay, so the current setup and what's happening under the hood here is that I was using a computer vision algorithm to detect objects in the room in real time, and then I was changing the colors of this visual based on what the camera was seeing, basically. So I wanted to have an artwork that changes itself based on what it sees around it. And this is kind of a rudimentary prototype compared to where I actually wanted to get, but I just didn't know how to do it. I want to make an artwork that modifies itself to please the viewer. I wanted to play with the idea that media content will become more and more personalized. So I was asking myself, what if art would behave like that as well? So to do that, I wanted to correlate individual features of the viewer with variations in the features of the image, of the shape that I was creating, like color, hue, sharpness, softness, things like that. And for the individual features of the viewer, I was looking at data points that I could work with from existing algorithms. So, for example, I found computer vision algorithms that detect gender and age and personality types. And I know some of these are problematic, but I think that's also why it's also an important question to ask and to look into it. And I found a lot of interesting research in empirical aesthetics that tries to do just that, to connect individual features of people with preference in visual art. It's not very conclusive, which doesn't help me, but, well, I hope I can get somewhere with this project, and this is really the kind of work I see myself maybe doing here, and yeah, maybe not. Let's see. So this brings me all to my goals and why I'm here at DMA. I think bottom line, what I really want to do is I want to define my artistic practice, and that means for me that I want to move a little bit from my position in doing design and being in the industry more towards doing art and living in the art world. We had a very interesting lecture from Erki this morning about the difference between design and art, which is nice to hear. So I want my work to really talk about the things I find, very important and fundamental, like perception. I'm really fascinated about how the world around us works, how light hits objects and then hits your eye, and the way you construct reality with it, the way we have this kind of shared reality. Also, how mediated reality works, so what role does the computer have in that? I want to look more a bit also in my, my own identity as an Eastern European. I've kind of neglected that, I think. Pop culture, I love watching music videos, and value is something I always ask myself about, why is some stuff better than other, why is some stuff, more expensive than other stuff. I like to understand systems, art and aesthetics, of course, and I also read a lot of topics within philosophy. What I want to learn here, and in general, I want to learn how to code because I would like to add interactivity to my 3D. I want to work with sensors and with spatial environments. And I also just want to think more with code. I think somehow some of my ideas are done like that, but I don't have all the pieces. And same goes for the context of of the art world. So first I want to understand more who are the other artists and what other art is being done, but also just practical aspects, how do you live as an artist? What are the institutions that you work with? And how do you write an artist statement and stuff like that? Theory, of course, I want to get more deeper into relevant literature in media arts. But ultimately, I also just want to work and experiment more freely. I'm a very structured person in general, and I think my work would really benefit from me just letting go sometimes and, not think so much about it. And I know this is a lot of stuff. I don't expect to do it here at DMA in 2 years, but I just wanted to give you a glimpse of where I'm coming, where I'm going, and somehow hoping that DMA will give me the context to just, eventually do it by myself. And this also gives you an insight of why I chose DMA, and I'm really happy that you guys chose me too. And yeah, that's it. That's me. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I think we have 5 minutes for questions, so. Yeah, Jules.
In the project you showed with the stones, can you talk about your decision to choose stones, like the rock formation as like the basis and stuff like that?
Yeah, I had this question before, and it's really, I think it's first of all somehow that I naturally work with in general, so it was easy for me to go to, but the real answer is I had 1 week. And I was like, okay, what I wanted to achieve with it was really this, to do the computer vision and then to change parts of the visual. And then I was like, okay, but it also has to look nice. So, I don't have a real, very thought through reason, but yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Have you done collaborations in the past, and or do you, what kind of collaborations are you looking forward to?
You mean, with other artists? Just coming from design, a lot of stuff that I do is collaborative in the sense that you always work with someone who knows code or someone who does music and stuff like that. So I'm really used to working in teams in that sense. And as for working with other artists, yeah, I'm really looking towards that. Also for the Mirror Neuron project, I was about to work with an artist who was coming from computer science, and I think he was completing the part that I didn't know how to do. So yeah, maybe artists that have other skills than me, and musicians as well. I think that's a big part, and it's something I'm really interested in too.
How would some of those projects maybe have evolved differently if you had some of the skills that you are interested in acquiring?
some of those. Oh, okay, yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think what comes to my mind is if I would have known code, I would have done many things maybe differently. Also, like for example, the sound sculptures, I would have loved to have it real time, but I didn't do it because I didn't know how to do it. And I think maybe I could iterate more and get to more complex variations, I would say, yeah, if I would have other skills, yeah. I think we're done in time. I'm not sure, Helen? Okay, so I can, yeah, leave the other person. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Vinny. I'm originally from New Haven, Connecticut, but I've been living in Brooklyn for the past few years. I did my undergraduate work at Boston College, where I mainly studied a mix of conceptual art, drawing, performance, and instruction, and really looking at the kind of relationship between those four ideas. I'm just going to play through a video game that I recently made. I'm going to talk about some of the theories and ideas that I've been thinking about and have this kind of playing in the background. So just to give some context for the game, the players are placed in this contextless room with no instruction, and you're given a brief text on the website for the game that reads, move around the room, look at the things, zoom in on the details, pick the things up, put the things down, inspect the things, think about the things, put the things together, maybe make a think face. And so yeah, this is just a playthrough of the game with someone trying to find like what the connections between these objects are. So what I'm most interested in this game and what I'm most interested in thinking about at DMA is making video games to explore an expanded concept of the digital. Beyond simply computation and electronics, to think through the ways in which the mode of the digital, as the concept of the divide, the threshold, has and continues to remake contemporary being. For me, the video game might just be the aesthetics of being made fully over by the digital, in which all relationships might be defined by the idea of division and difference. So thinking politically, although many aspects of our lived reality are beyond the modality of the digital, yet still the digital is the site of contemporary power. The digital is where capital exploits labor, and the digital is where bodies, technologies, and societies are organized. And that's just a quote from Alex Galloway. So perhaps we might be able to use the digital game to think and make sense of being under the digital domain, to perhaps outthink or rethink the digital through the game, to show the algorithm its uncanny self, or maybe even use the game to simply make our own digitality or digital thinking violently apparent, to see what, if anything, remains. So these ideas are very much informed by the recent writings of Alex Galloway, so when I discuss the concept of the digital, I'm very much thinking about it in an expanded sense, beyond how it's conventionally defined, trying to define it as a concept at a much lower level, as something that might even go back to early Greek philosophy. I'm also very much relying on Mackenzie Wark's writing on video games, even to the point where my hopes with video games might be best summed up with a quote from Wark's gamer theory, and that what I hope to do with games is to, and this is where the quote begins, to make a safe space, a safe haven, to enact the problem of being as it appears in game space, but without the oppressive stakes of one's own life on the line. And game space here, for me, crudely is defined as being made over by this kind of digital modality. So this work is the most recent work in which I tried to think through a lot of these ideas. I was thinking through ideas of play and labor and how they relate to the digital, and this kind of notion of labor today as this kind of creative practice of meaning making. But more to the core, I was thinking about this idea of transformation, particularly transformation of the self through Catholic or mystic practices, transformation of the self through networks of logistical capital, as well as general transformation by way of surrealism. I won't talk too much about the play and labor stuff, but kind of more focusing on the core of thinking of this surrealism slash mysticism, notions of what I'm thinking about as the transubstantial. So I wanted to think through in what way, if any, how these ideas might relate to the concept of the digital, especially what they might tell us about contemporary power. In the same way that life passed specifically through the bit seems to have the quality of being able to be tracked and transformed at any moment, there seems to be, to me, some implicit digital understanding of being in surrealism and notions of the transubstantial, in which all objects and their properties might be reduced to some common homogeneous substrate, in which all might be transformed with the properties then passed and shared amongst them. So in this way, the clock takes on the properties of melting, in the example we all know pretty well, or the pumpkin might take on the face with emotions, or the bread, literally body. Surrealism and transformation more generally, in its play with the digital reality, seems to have something to say about a world in submission to the digital, defined by these distinctions and thresholds. Surrealism might have failed in its original mission to remake over a much more analog world, but perhaps it has something to say about game space and the concentration of power in the digital. As a note here, I'm also interested in Jacob Gadbury's recent writings about computer graphics and the 3D model, with its inherent separation of material properties from its structure, and how those might relate to notions of surreal or surrealism. So this is just that final face that's created when you go through the game. Yeah, really playing with the idea that the silly and the serious kind of coexist. As to how I got to this point in my thinking and my work, for the past few years I've been generally interested in ideas of meaning, being, and our relationship to objects in the world, beginning with these early instructional works that had players and participants interacting with their world in strange ways. And these were written out as very elaborate instructions, a kind of a poetic exploration of the instructional form. So here are some examples of some PDFs that went on for about 20 pages each with kind of very detailed instructions. And here's an example of those instructions and them being carried out in an exhibition space. So in this one, players played a bit of a game in which they collectively had to fill an urn with pistachios in the middle of the room. This drawing on the wall that you see, if they had filled the urn, would be burned and sealed in the urn, along with all their paper waste and pistachio shells. And they actually filled it, and so I still have the urn just kind of sitting in my apartment. It was auctioned off, but nobody wanted it, so. So from there, I began to incorporate 3D renderings into these instructions to kind of give an idea of the possibilities that might happen for these instructions, but also playing with that notion of the virtual, between the 3D model and this idea of virtuality. But eventually I just began to think of the 3D model as the instructions itself, thinking about the 3D model as a conceptual tool for things that might be, or realities that might exist, thinking of them as stores of potential energy for the possible or the impossible. So here's some examples of that, and some of these kind of lead to more narrative readings and other are more quiet contemplative readings. Another example of these kind of suggestions, this one reads, suggestion: a pig visits my bedside, a diorama of the French Revolution in their back, walnuts in their ears, a carrot candle illuminates. Just some kind of details of that render. That's just how it looked in the render view. And then I did a few of these pigs once, and here's another one. This one, the pig is pushing Duchamp's shovel through my apartment. So these 3D renderings and models became very in-depth, and I began to explore the ways in which these instructions for objects might become more specific, and the meanings that might arise as these objects became more detailed. So this kind of culminated in this last 3D render where everything is kind of extremely specific. The title for this one reads, Suggestion. 2 children spin on the blade of a blender. We know no harm will come of this. A rice cooker filled with aggression, possibly so-called male. 2 cardboard cutouts in a toaster of me and you. And then here's just some kind of details. I was here also really thinking about drawing in expanded form. These were also fully accessible online for anyone to download and use in their projects. So really thinking about drawing as something that doesn't have to exist on paper, but can exist on a 3D model. And most of my kind of models end up on my Sketchfab page for anyone to download. So I would say my movement into games was me really wanting to explore the conceptual ideas I was talking about, but it also came from this kind of impetus to combine these earlier instructional works with these highly detailed 3D models. At DMA, I'm hoping to explore these ideas of being and objects in the digital further in video games, and I'm hoping really to pay particular attention to how these ideas of the digital very much relate to conditions of contemporary capital, and perhaps how video games might think ourselves into and beyond this game space. Thank you. That's all. Mm-hmm.
So thank you for the presentation. I have 2 quick questions for you. So it seems like this sort of like theory and writing is an important element of that. So I'm just curious about like what do you plan to do on that field? And the other thing is that many of your influences are very much like New York East Coast based. So what do you expect to add to your practice in the crazy world of Southern California?
Yeah, I know. I feel very much like a student of the New York Media Theory School. In terms of like writing, I think that's something I'm hoping to explore here, is this kind of balance between this kind of theory writing, but also like the silliness and playfulness I like to bring to the games. I'm hoping to find a way to explore that idea further, like thinking about these really serious ideas through these very kind of silly ways. I mean, I'm hoping to specifically write my thesis on this idea about video games and digitality. Yeah, I mean, I'm also very much interested in media archaeology from like Jacob Gadbury's book, so I'm hoping to learn more through that lens. Yeah. Sure, Jenna or Ito, either.
I kind of had a question similar to Ricky's. I was wondering if the mythos and the images and the theory that you're working with is related to a sense of place, or if it's more related to who you are and personal experience. So similar to what Ricky said,
Mm-hmm.
will changing place change your kind of digital vernacular, or do you think that you carry it with you because it's who you are?
I actually made kind of a lot of my easy shaker face living with my parents, who are very Catholic, so that's where I started thinking through a lot of these ideas. So that's when I became really interested in this notion of the transubstantial as something that like causes a division and then allows that threshold for things to be passed over, and how that might relate to some idea of the digital. So yeah, I'm definitely open to kind of changing what these ideas are and seeing what influences come. Mhm.
I'm curious about the project, vegetable
Mhm.
what's your feelings about that project? Does it feel too like a perfect project in your estimation, or is there something about it you
Mhm.
like? I'm kind of interested in your self-criticism of that part.
Something I didn't, something I want to kind of explore more with games is more kind of a systems approach and less this kind of linear kind of idea. I mean, it worked because I was thinking about this like process of building something, and it's called my Easy Shaker Yoke Face because I was thinking a lot about shaker aesthetics and this idea that it's like through this labor something is transformed. So that kind of related to like moving in a linear pattern, and once you figure out the pattern, you can also repeat it. But I'm looking with games to maybe bring in more ideas of chaos and things that are thought of as traditionally analog into the game, to kind of see what the space is between the digital and the analog in the game.
What is your ideal setting for an audience? Are you interested in people capturing engaging through online, on a screen at home, or more like installations or gallery settings?
Yeah, that's definitely something that I'm thinking about when approaching this program is like how might the presentation of these things change? I think before I was really into this idea of people within their own space kind of huddled over, engaging with these at their own pace. Especially the 3D models or the renderings, like really like being separate from an institution where you're kind of just there and engaging and playing. I'm interested in ideas of how those might relate to the gallery, and if you can even create a kind of space like that where people can engage, or also like I'm also kind of getting interested in ideas of spectation with games, where people watching other people play games and what that might be. But okay, thanks everyone.
Hello everyone. My name is Wan Tong. I come from Shenzhen, China, and I actually come from a very cross-disciplinary background. 4 years ago, I was studying actuarial science in the University of California, Santa Barbara, and that year I decided to transfer completely from the mathematics and statistics side to fine art. So I went to School of the Art Institute of Chicago to focus on new media art and fine arts practices. So I would like to start my presentation today with this project titled Owned, Be Owned, or Remain Invisible. It is a real-time generated program I developed with Open Frameworks in 2020. The work features a 3D scanned body of myself, which is distorted and deformed in response to the viewer's gaze. So for this piece, I wanted to create a system of data visualization that would rethink structural dichotomy and also pre-establish power relationships through looking at topics of ownership, body dysmorphic disorder, and also gender role orientations. Oops. So basically how this piece works is that when the presence of viewer is detected through the webcam's facial recognition algorithm, the virtual body will start to collapse and become unrecognizable. And if no one is looking, the body will repair itself and return back to its original state. I think there is a G that should be playing, but somehow it's not. So let's see. So every time the system is activated, the viewer then owns the imagery of the body by looking at it and thus controlling the morphine. And reciprocally, the viewer is owned by the system as they're under the detection and surveillance of the webcam. So when I was working on this project, the article Feminist Data Visualization, written by Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren F. Klein, came to me. And in their writing, they call attention to this fundamental question of epistemology, discussing who is included in dominant ways of producing knowledge and whose perspectives are marginalized. The two authors also proposed 6 principles of feminist data visualization. Some of these ideas really influenced this project heavily, and also the philosophy behind my art practice later on. So the first concept, examine power and aspire to empowerment, has led me towards the examination of power dynamics within social, cultural, and technological systems. And as for the legitimized embodiment and effect, I work to transform computational logic and store data into effective experiences that would further stimulate human agency, understanding, and empathy. So here is another piece that really centered around this idea of gaze being violent. It is a 2D game of real-time generated environment that dissolves and disintegrates also in reaction to the player's gaze. Real Space is a digital restoration of my grandma's demolished old house in Shanxi, China. So at that time, I was reading news about forced demolition and eviction happened in Beijing. Many low-income families and migrant workers, they became homeless after the government torn down the so-called illegal constructions without giving any compensation or relocation. That news reminded me of my grandma's old house, where the site has now become the central plaza of the county. That's when I felt the urge to really create a piece to talk about all these topics of housing demolition, social evolution, and memory loss. So I started to talk to many family members. Some of them I haven't spoken for years, and they shared with me their memories of the place and also their collections of old photos. Compiling these collective memories, I managed to directly restore the living room of the house, creating a simulacrum of the no longer exist architecture. And then I developed an interactive mechanism that would apply but also subvert the logic of traditional first-person shooter games. So I wanted to turn that brutal and violent mechanism into something poetic, slow, or even really boring. So as a result, instead of having people kill with their guns, I created a system where people will shoot with their gaze. And every time a player looks at an object, the line of sight will be detected and turned into invisible bullets that will break and push away the object and eventually destroy the environment. So in the end, I was able to create an unstable and vulnerable space where there is a consequence of simply looking at things. About a year later, I did a VR variation of this piece for a show in the NAS Museum in Shenzhen Sea Art Culture and Arts Center. And at that time, we all thought this medium would be a perfect fit for this project, as I was exploring topics of gaze interaction and also the inability of the body. However, it turned out that I felt really uncomfortable about that isolated immersion and also this burden brought by the chunky headset. And I was reminded again about the materiality of the virtual, which is something we as media artists shouldn't really forget about. And that has led me to this next project, which is an outdoor AR experience called Liminal. Combining the simulated wireframe nature with concrete reality, users are encouraged to explore the envelope space through their bodily movement. And the title of the piece comes from an interview with 3D artist Claudia Hart, in which she describes the liminal state as a state on the threshold before a participant experienced a promised transformation. In the liminal state, we feel both real and not real at the same time. In a liminal state, we can be alive but also not. And I think we are exactly in a time when the world is moving towards that promised transformation. Also for more frictionless, more endless scrolling, more immersed experiences in general. Not to mention all the hype around metaverse and NFT going on at that time. And that's why I wanted to create kind of an interrogation, a pause, or a call to consciousness that by adding in friction so that people will have a moment to wonder in that state of liminality and also ambiguity. And to really have a moment to reflect on technology, to think about how do we design future, how do we design engagement, and where again humanity is put in the center so that we can bring like something positive and something real from all these experiences. And after that, I became more interested in AR experiences and created Macroplastic, which is a series of AR awareness design that address the issue of marine pollution. This project envisions a speculative evolution of marine ecosystems, imagining how organisms would co-evolve with microplastics, eventually turning into hybrids of nature and human pollution. However, I believe that most people are aware of these topics about marine pollution or microplastics to some degree. Still, these concepts seem too distant from our everyday perception to immediately relate with. It's more like a hyperobject, a term coined by Timothy Morton to describe objects so massively distributed in space and time that transcend spatial temporal specificity. As a result, I want to seek for a way to really convey that specificity in my practice. That's how I started to explore the interface between the ocean and human daily life to look for that point of contact. And that's how I decided to put these AR experiences on people's dining table. So by placing these imaginary organisms on the user's plate, the work really refers to our most common, intimate encounters with marine life, which is eating seafood, and with an aim to bridge that disconnection between the abstract knowledge of ecological thinking and the embodied experience of our everyday perception. Are the GIFs like playing? Thanks. So I think for the future, I think first and foremost, I wanted to like explore with more tangible media and also like physical fabrication, because ever since the COVID, I was removed from my physical studio, and like my whole practice like shifted like completely online, and that is something that I want to take advantage of here at DMA. And also another important thing is I want to like create space for myself to really experiment, improvise, and play, because as you can see, like a lot of my practices, they are heavy, like concept driven, and I always like tend to like think a lot before I actually like experiment with a medium. Though those are the things that I'm being think of recently, and also several projects in mind that I will planning to like work on this quarter. And that'll be all. Thank you so much. And for the Q&A. Yeah.
I want to start from the end. So I'm very curious about this imagery funeral project idea that you have here. So do you have any sort of like further thoughts how that might be realized? How would you work on this? I think it's a very super interesting idea.
Yeah, I've been looking through a lot of like machine learning and AI projects recently, and thinking about like the really mass-produced imagery and what does they mean right now, because there are like just like way too many like images online you can like easily like produce and find. And I wanted to create a system that you can like literally like kill these images, like not like deleting them or like putting them into the trash bin, but like literally like destroy these images. And I'm planning to like create a system that will connect the machine learning directly to that kill action, so that once they're like produced, I can like just like destroy them like permanently. That is like how I've been like thinking about this project. But technically speaking, I'm still like working on that part right now. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm really, I love that you put like the person and your research interests at the forefront. And just very selfishly, I want to know more about digital lovers. Can you tell me more about your interest in digital lovers?
I think it's like it speaks a lot to my personal like background, and also like my relationship with my partner, because they're from Taiwan, so we have been like a couple of like digital lovers for like 2 or 3 years, until like recently we are able to like really meet in person in Los Angeles, and that feels like really like weird to me somehow. And I've been thinking a lot about like our like intimate like connection with our digital like screens, with our phones, with all these like hardware like controllers, keyboards and mouse. And I think that really like speaks to like these concept of digital lovers as well. So I think there are like many different takes for you to like really read this topic, and I want to like explore its possibilities a little bit more. Yeah. Hi.
Could you talk more about your feelings after doing the VR experience and how what you felt was triggering that?
Yeah, I think at first we all expected the piece to like really translate well into the medium of VR, because it was originally developed in Unity 3D. So technically, it is a really easy process to do that work. But however, I feel like the physical burden that brought by the headset is something that really pushes away the audience from that experience and that immersion. And also like people will feel like isolated and like helpless when they're in that situation, because they don't know like where to like interact with other people. So I feel like that is something I've been considering when I was like transferring my practice into like AR, because they're like both immersed and not immersed at the same time in the setting of augmented reality. Yeah. And that become like a recent focus of my practice. Yeah, Michael.
I'm curious to hear more about your cultural practices. What does it mean to use a grain fortune cookie, which is such a westernized Chinese icon for Chinese food, into this concept of VR?
Yeah, I was thinking about the stereotypes of like Asian, and also like these like special like icon of like fortune cookie that is like really like originates in the US, but people like will always like associate them with like Asian culture or Chinese food culture. And originally I was planning to like make a fortune cookie machine that shows like censored word in the Chinese social media. And I think that is like a really complicated thing, because for one aspect, like these like censored words in the Chinese social media, they can only be like appeared outside of the Chinese social media. Like they can only like exist outside of the Chinese like digital space and like the web. And on the other hand, it is interesting to see like mostly like the portray of Chinese cultures and identities are coming from a negative way, like in the Western like world or culture. And I think that is also like I don't know, it's like commenting on that aspect also. So right now I'm thinking of like not like only like include like censorship words in Chinese, but also like in general, like in English also. And don't tell like the audience about that fact. So they will think like it is only like Chinese words that are being censored, but it's actually like words from every culture that are censored in this piece. Oh, I think my time's...
Oh, you did? Oh, okay. Here we go. Hi. Before I start, I just want to say I probably am going to start talking really fast. So I have a transcript of this whole talk. And if you can't understand me, I can share it with the corresponding slides afterwards. So... okay. Display. Oh, we're already mirroring. Okay, cool. That's the transcript. Here we go. Okay. Oh, here we go. Sorry, turn this off. Okay. Oh yeah, I'm getting it right now. Yeah, we just practiced this beforehand. Hopefully it will be realized right now. Okay, perfect. Okay. Hi everybody. My name is Juliana Johnston, and I am originally from Baltimore, Maryland. I'm an interdisciplinary artist and an arts educator. I've taught for years in nonprofits, and I'm also the director of the Oxbow School's Summer Art Institute in Northern California. A little bit about my education background. I received my BFA from the Rhode Island School of Design and Sculpture, and I also studied in the Performance Studies department at Brown University, and most recently spent the last year at Carnegie Mellon. My current work questions how experience is documented, refracted, and mediated through digital interfaces. Co-opting the mechanisms of surveillance and the visual lexicon of data collection, I create interactive experiences, performances, and media works that examine how these technologies datify reality in order to coerce and obscure legibility. Basically, I'm very interested in complex systems and how to represent them and how we understand them, and particularly interested in what that understanding can even mean in the cacophony of the present. So in 2017, I began to do workshops with groups of people to try and understand how people understood complex systems. Previously, I had been creating improvisational group performances that use scores and choreographic objects, and I translated this into a kind of more open-ended workshop that asked participants to use props resembling infographics to express their own collaboratively created understanding of systems from their water cycle to their personal relationships to stanzas of poetry read aloud. And in the process, like problem solving, discussing, and at times just using movement to communicate with one another, these workshops kind of became embodied group thinking as well as group play. I would document these workshops and analyze them really tediously, transcribing audio, interviewing participants, using kind of social science data tools to understand group dynamics, and did structural choreographic analysis, oftentimes to recreate and reperform these workshops. The analysis I was doing was very tedious, like this project where I collaborated with a Swiss sheep farmer to uniquely identify each of their sheep in their herd and create a facial tracking system for them. I began to view this work and data collection as almost a form of durational performance. I was doing the work of AI. I was doing all this tracking manually. So one of the reasons I wanted to pursue graduate study was to learn how to expedite some of this analysis. I was doing myself using media. I wanted to translate these workshops and I kind of began to realize that this past year in ways, experimenting with Touch Designer, Isadora, Connect, and RealSense. in this interactive installation, the volumetric space between bodies within the installation is tracked. It's inspired directly from a workshop I did in 2019, in which I led participants through a geometric poses, kind of like group yoga, in which we used discussion prompts to figure out the distance between ourselves, not using metrical numbers or distance, but instead trying to figure out the relational distance, the kind of soft qualitative distance between us. And this kind of media interpretation of it, the volumetric space, as it shifts, controls a soundscape, and it kind of creates at once it delineates at once the relationship physically between the users, but also as a place to prompt interaction and build playful relations. And this documentation is when I had some dancers come in to activate the installation, but otherwise it was open for anyone. Okay, so tangent to this workshop practice, I also have been engaging in some experiments where I turn myself into a real-life avatar. Wearing a head-mounted camera, I invite participants to control my body and navigate through space using voice commands. In this first iteration in 2019, titled Live Stream Derive, I invited people to aimlessly explore a lush green field, and combine multiple first-person views to create this fractured and kind of intimately expanded portrait of the landscape. Again, became an avatar in 2020 in the first months of the pandemic. I invited over 20 users to enter this kind of makeshift studio I had created in my garage to make whatever they wanted, similarly using voice commands, titled r/generative isolation, a reference to Reddit forums. I felt this was a physical manifestation of digital space. And I took the first-person videos and collaged them together on top of a 3D model of the space. I was trying to illustrate the collaborations I had witnessed over time with my own body, almost like summarizing the behavioral data I had enacted with my own body, collapsing time and distant users into one space, representing the complex, minute interactions and many spoken instructions. It resulted in a cacophony. These are, excuse me, an idea of the audio.
Left. Finish me.
Or yellow adjacent. Nice. And a paintbrush.
Oh,
perfect.
Let's find some orange paint.
All
Can
right.
you look to the left?
Paint and everything bright yellow.
Okay,
We're just gonna try
keep turning.
I guess that's
Let's
about all
see,
I
what's
know.
in the cabinets or the drawers right
Do
below?
you think we should paint
And
everything that is
go
overflowing
to
out of
that.
blue?
Okay, so coming off of that project, this past fall, I was loaned 20 cell phones from the Studio of Creative Inquiry at Carnegie Mellon. And I was initially interested in creating photogrammetry from the point of view of the body. I had been putting a camera on my head, and I was interested in what perhaps it would feel like to put cameras all over the body and to kind of see what the body sees. And I was particularly interested in trying to capture photogrammetry of touch and what that would be. So as I often do, I gathered some people together to experiment and played around, did some movement activities. In one exercise, everyone was in a tight circle around me, and I kind of did a trust fall into everybody. And then using that short footage, I created this 3D model, and then tracked again those original video stills from some of the individual cameras back onto the model. I was interested in how this model failed and was really bad. At moments where the hands were distorted and strangely digitally mediated, it kind of felt like a strangely digitally mediated translation of touch. Also, it was my first experience with photogrammetry, so maybe I'm just bad at it. But eventually I showed this in a 3-channel installation. So as a warning, the next slide will include video with like some flashing lights, so to be warned. So alongside the photogrammetry I was doing this past year, I was also exploring the myth of Argus Panoptis, a giant in Greek mythology covered in eyes, and also the origin of the word panopticon. Argus is in ways an embodied panopticon. So the myth of Panoptis is many things and has many translations, but to be brief, basically Panoptis is sent to guard Io, a nymph that's been turned into a cow. While guarding Io, Panoptis is tricked and beheaded, and Panoptis is then turned into a fly that torments Io as they track the known world. So for this project, I worked with local Pittsburgh dancers and a playwright in Athens to translate the myth. And in the performance, the cameras on Panoptis's body were live streaming back onto the walls of the space, creating kind of this circulatory visual system. And then I combined the photogrammetry technique I previously mentioned to represent Panoptis' new visuality after being turned into a fly. And then I'll end quickly by talking about two other projects really quick that I spent some time on this past year working on that I hope to build off of this coming year. So it's not often you have 20 cell phones in your possession. So I kind of began experimenting with these phones as digital building blocks. And I created a video essay that played across all the phones that prompted users to build shapes and forms with the phones. And the topic of the video essay was emergence in technology. And I really hope to kind of expand and build upon this idea. I think maybe translating into a web-based application, just this idea of like everyone's individual phones kind of coming together to be this collective object, this collective communication tool in space at one time is really of interest to me. And then lastly, so that's kind of how.
Rub your hands.
Oh, I'll skip over that for now. And then I'll finish with this the last project I finished the year with. I did this with a collaborator, Tom Shellis, and basically it's a game of high-tech tetherball, tracking the ball and wiring up the pole. We were able to control an immersive visual projection and sound installation based on the position of the ball and the progress of the game. So the soundscape intensifies as the gameplay intensifies, then further intensifying the gameplay. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated your work. I don't know like a big question or a fair question, but there's so many threads of this that I'm just curious how you bring together embodiment, multiple points of view, simultaneity, trying to translate that for a viewer or these complex systems. Can you bring some of this together for us?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of what I don't know necessarily. I guess that's something I'm trying to figure out in my practice. You know, I was interested in these complex systems, how we understand them. Then I started making these complex systems that are hard to understand. And I guess right now I'm kind of in this flux space of, and is this kind of perpetual question of what it means. I mean, I'm really interested in being alive and the systems around us, and this particularly, I'm a very social person, so I'm really interested in the social systems around us. So I think the work is kind of an exploration for me to try and to ponder these questions with others in a lot of ways. A lot of it is just bringing people together into kind of improvisational spaces to kind of see how we respond, and then at times sitting alone in the editing room, it is kind of this sense of trying to decipher and deconstruct and kind of thinking critically about what that role is of being the data collector, being the analysis, and trying to understand. But I don't know, it's a lot of things. It's kind of cacophonous in itself, and I think one of the things I'm excited about in this moment after kind of doing this year that fixated on 20 cell phones is to kind of ground and figure out what that means for me. I think the future would be expanding more into public space and to actual communities, so moving away from simulations that I create into real space in real time. I don't know if that's an answer, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
I really love all of your works, but I was especially interested in the last work you showed us. This game. Was there any specific goal or rules?
Yeah, so this game, let's see if I can play. Yeah, so it's a game called Tetherball, and so it's pretty common in like American summer camps. A lot of people I've talked to have like a very nostalgic perspective to it, but basically the idea of the game is there's two people on different sides, and one is trying to wind the ball around the pole in one direction, and the other is trying to wind it in the reverse direction. So for me, it has this idea of kind of childhood intensity, but it was just kind of the perfect format for this exploration we were doing.
So it was more like a cooperative game rather than a competitive game?
No, it's competitive. It's extremely competitive. It's like kind of the basic competitive. It's like 1 versus 1, hitting and facing each other, and it's just like brute force kind of that creates the dynamic and the conflict. Or that's basically how you win, just like brute force, and height helps a lot. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In your performative works, the eyes on the body with the dancer and the dance, the group. For example, how about the audience? Where is the audience located? Is there an audience?
Yeah.
Does the piece look in reality for a viewer in the audience? Is this, in your opinion, more successful than seeing it as a documentation or as slides and pictures?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about audience and what you want to create and where the work is kind of then determined. This is the piece. That is it.
Yeah, so that particular work with the phones is a little fraught. It was originally supposed to be just a live performance, and then it was in the Omicron peak that it was planned for, so kind of had to shift everything, and it then became a performance for video, which I haven't done ever, and I don't know about it. I kind of think the full realization of that piece would just be to do the live performance initially, but it kind of challenged me in ways. I don't know. I think for me it would just be the performance after making the whole video. But in general, I think the audience, the performances, the audience is just witness, and what I am trying to understand more is how to make kind of collapse my performances with my workshops, perhaps, and make that all happen in space and it all be kind of collaborative with one another and everything all coming together, maybe. But usually with other performance works, it's just it's kind of happening in the space. Sometimes it's durational performances in gallery spaces, so it's just kind of happening over time. Other times it's more kind of like, here it's happening now, it happens. But almost always it's usually just one time, one try, let's do it, let's try. I mean, some rehearsals, but usually when I'm seeing it, everyone's seeing it, I'm also seeing it for the first time. Sorry, my time is up, but thank you so very much. I can't get out of this. Do you know how to make it minimize? Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry, thanks.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Oh boy, here we go. So, hello everyone. I'm Hua. I use they, them, he, him pronouns. I grew up in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and later lived in Singapore. And I came to California, Los Angeles for the undergraduate program 4 years ago, and then now I'm back. So just a warning, a lot of my work has a lot of flashing colors and strobe animations, so if you need to do anything, feel free to do so. So just a brief background of what I did pre-college. Let me just maximize this. I did a lot of Photoshop animation, and I made a couple of experimental shorts. These are some clips from Untitled Kafka, which was my first experimental short. And this was another film that I made. But more recently, I've been more interested in sort of more interactive interfaces. This was my sort of first Unity game called Push All the Buttons. And what I was doing here really was like being interested in sort of networks that are sort of beneath this sort of like facade of the UI, where like it may seem simple on the outside, but actually there's a lot more going on underneath. So the whole goal of this game is to push all the buttons, which seems simple enough, straightforward enough, but at some point you realize that some buttons toggle other buttons, and the sort of relationship becomes a lot more complicated. And so this is the tutorial, but if you go to the actual game, It's a lot messy. It's a lot messier, I suppose. Yeah. And another sort of game that I made was called User ID, which was a processing game I made for Casey's class. And a lot of this is about sort of, I guess, navigating a very fluid identity and how these sort of like ghosts of our past selves live online. And also it's about sort of the normalization of privacy invasions in this day and age. So the whole goal of this game is to sort of log into this console and find user ID. And if you get the password wrong, the console laughs at you. And yeah, it's sort of this futile attempt of like trying to figure out who user ID is. So there are clues if you try to be a bit more explorative, I suppose. And once you enter the system, you sort of try to navigate through this mosaic of files and try to find user ID. But eventually you realize that user ID cannot be found ever, because once you find user ID, the file corrupts and the cycle repeats. But lately I've been less sort of interested in gamey games and more interested in games about networks. So I was interested in sort of, I guess, lately I feel like a lot of the goal of technology is to make interactions very seamless. And I feel like it is more to, I suppose, our benefit to realize that these are ultimately interfaces that mediate our interactions and even control them. So I was really interested. These are some sketches that I made for Chandler's tangible media class. So I was thinking about controllers that control other controllers that control other controllers, and also thinking about communication technologies as a form of labor, and also how that relates to the labor of memory. And so just for context, because of the nature of being an international student, a lot of my relationships or close relationships are long distance, and I'm inevitably reliant upon all these sort of communication technologies. So I guess it's a way for me to kind of understand my relationship with this technology and also how that translates to my relationship interpersonally, yeah. So this was kind of a prototype that I made, which sort of is inspired by sort of my conversations with my grandma, who's like very, very old, and sort of relating this sort of difficulty of translating our interactions from the direct sort of interaction to a more sort of mediated form, and how that also relates to like her failing memory. Yeah. And this was another project also sort of reflecting upon long distance relationships. So this was a postcard exchange project with my friend from Singapore, who's now currently in London. Their name is Laurent, they're a designer as well. And basically the funny thing about our relationship was that even though we knew of each other as classmates in high school, we only actually became friends like when we were all graduated and far apart. And so this project was sort of an opportunity to kind of reflect on our relationships and how we sort of ground each other through these very liminal interactions. And this was another postcard that I wrote to Laurent, and it was about, this was a time when I was like revisiting old game websites such as Neopets, Club Penguin, and realizing sadly that a lot of these spaces have been so run down, especially ever since Flash sort of got discontinued, and sort of me reflecting about what I guess what we can do to sort of preserve these spaces and also what is left. This is another project that I made more recently. This was a capstone project I made last spring. It was actually located right over there in the corner. I don't want to talk too much about this project because I might want to show it for crit presentation. So I'm sorry. But to briefly sum it up, it's kind of like a creative research project which explores fandoms as sort of a platform for liberation in the context of censorship. So where I'm from in Malaysia and Singapore, a lot of our queer history has been erased since colonialism, and currently we have a lot of conservative government parties going on. So this was sort of a way for me to reflect on sort of how myself and a lot of my friends learned about queerness and found access to queer knowledge through the internet. And so, yeah, I mean, I have a lot of complicated feelings about this project, but this is what it is. And more recently, I made a sort of archive of my gameplay in Spore, because Spore used to be a CD distributed game, but now because everything's moved online, there's a lot of sort of difficulty of, I guess, controlling who gets to enter their servers and who is actually, like, there used to be CD keys that used to better regulate this thing, but now it's like a whole mess. So yeah, this was kind of my way to kind of take autonomy over sort of my personal data, and also, yeah, I used photogrammetry to sort of capture all these, and it looks, I really like the ones that look so broken, and sometimes you get dimensional information that you don't necessarily get from the in-game. So like, for example, this model, like, I wasn't able to see sort of this extrusion because it's always from the aerial view. And yeah, pretty much it. So what do I want to do for MFA? So yeah, I guess moving forward, I do want to sort of continue reflecting about reflecting on my relationships that are formed through these network technologies, thinking about sort of how this negotiates our level of intimacy, how it takes shape, and sort of understanding this balance between parasocial or like, yeah, actual social, and also understanding how people navigate sort of multiple personas over the internet, and also understanding the internet and the virtual space in sort of its material properties, such as labor, access, and its inequities, and also figuring out how to sort of preserve online histories, presents, and futures, especially from the context I'm coming from, which is sort of queer and trans knowledge, and also how we can take control over these community spaces and our personal memories. So thank you, everyone. Feel free to ask me any questions.
I'll start with the super light one.
Sure.
Is the Spore game like the Will Wright Spore game? Is it a different Spore game?
It's the EA Spore game. Yeah, it's the OG.
And you really like playing it?
I do love it, yeah. Yeah.
I guess your chef, especially from Jenna in my class last quarter, into tool building as preservation of community spaces. Can you speak more about your efforts on giving tools, small tools?
Well, for one, I'm a one-person team so far, so that's kind of where I'm at capacity. And also just like being okay with experimentation over perfectionism, I think, is kind of my approach to things, although I do admit that I want to be more technically adept in this program, so yeah. Yes?
You showed work from many different mediums in your presentation. I'm curious if there's or what more specifically you're interested in pursuing in the next couple of years. So
Mm.
how if the medium influences what direction you want to go?
That's a good question. I feel like my approach changes according to what concepts are like kind of fit the mediums. I am interested in sort of making it more accessible online. So maybe like websites or even just like web games around that sort of direction. Thank you.
Well, I do kind of want to ask a very leading question, jumping off of that. I got really excited about your potential project from Channing's class, the Nickelodeon and I realized that I haven't seen work from you that doesn't live on the screen until I saw these about your conversations with your grandmother. And I was curious if you're interested in pursuing kind of works off screen.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the nature of this program is that inevitably it's going to take some form of physical space, right? Especially for our show. I think that's sort of an opportunity for me to think about how I can exhibit this work spatially and how that sort of changes the form of it. Yeah, so I'm really excited about that. If not, we can all go to lunch. Thank you. Mm.
Yeah. Oh, listen.